Hello, my name is Elaine Leeder, and this is a podcast called From Despair to Repentance: Jews, Spirituality, and Restorative Justice. This program is sponsored by the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and Society, where I am a fellow. The mission of IJSS is to advance scholarship, social transformation, while bringing Jewish knowledge, spiritual knowledge, to bear on the toughest challenges of contemporary society. We break down barriers between spheres of knowledge and practice, enabling long-term collaboration among scholars, social researchers, and human service practitioners. Please visit us at www.ijss.org to find out more about what we are doing. In my capacity as a fellow, I've been speaking around the country about restorative justice using a spiritual lens. This year marks the first year of our podcasts, bringing you people who are engaged in the work on the ground with real people, but imbuing what they do with a spiritual practice. To that end, this is my fourth podcast, and I'm bringing you Jenna Robinson, MFT and Professor of Counseling. So let me introduce Professor Robinson, and then we'll talk with her. Jenna Robinson is a poetry therapist, performance poet, musician, and professor located in the Bay Area of California. Jenna is a steadfast advocate for empowering people at the margins to author their stories of resistance and resilience using written and oral traditions. She's been performing and teaching spoken word workshops to youth and adults since 2011. She is a two-time Grand Slam champion of Hawaii Slam, competed on 7 national slam poetry teams, placed second in the nation at the 2015 National Poetry Slam in Oakland, California. She currently runs an intergenerational therapeutic writing program through the Bay Area Creative, and her therapy practice is focused on supporting people who've experienced abuse and trauma. I'd like to introduce Professor Jenna Robinson. Hello, Jenna.
Hi, thank you, Elaine.
Thank
Great
you.
to great to be talking to you.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. And I'm really glad you're willing to do this podcast with me.
Yeah, of course.
So, I'm wondering if you might just tell me something about the work that you're doing and who you work with and what kind of capacity you're doing your work.
Mm, sure. I think like many therapists, I wear several hats. One, I'm in private practice. I see adults and adolescents predominantly in my private practice. Um, uh, Main issue that folks are experiencing is surviving trauma, a lot of experiences of abuse. I also teach at a master's level in counseling psychology. I teach at 2 different schools. I teach at the Wright Institute, and I also teach at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I teach in their expressive arts therapy program. And that's actually the program that I graduated from. I graduated with my master's in expressive arts therapy. Uh, and then I also work for a writing nonprofit, a spoken word nonprofit called Bay Area Creative, where I run a program called Revisions. And that's our therapeutic writing program. And that program works with people of all ages. We work with intergenerational groups, with families. A lot of the work that we do is going into juvenile detention facilities and working with the adolescents there. And the idea being, using poetry, using spoken word as a tool for healing and community connection. And that's one of my expertise, or my focus really is about poetry, about using poetry as a therapeutic tool, and specifically using performance poetry, spoken word poetry that's meant to be told, to be heard, and the experience folks get of telling their story, but also being witnessed by attuned, attentive others. Yeah, so I work with a lot of different people, but across all the different places I've worked, everybody has a shared experience, I think, of experiencing trauma. So I would say that's kind of predominantly who I am called to work with.
And let me ask you, before we get to your client group and what you do with them, how did you get into this kind of work? I mean, to go into juvenile detention facilities and trauma work is not an easy gig.
Yeah. Long long story. I will say that I have been using music, performance, poetry, some sort of art my whole life. It's been a tool for me to express myself. Community theater came at a point in my childhood when I was having a really rough time and just sparked a love of the arts. And knowing that being able to focus and create and to have competency with an art really helped me. It really saved my life at so many points in my life. All that to say, um, I had a brother who overdosed when I was 19, 18, and music became more predominant in my life and eventually spoken word as a way to cope with what was going on in my family. Um, and and eventually he actually passed away. And one of the things I felt called to do was to write and to perform and to be with people, to teach people how to use that tool. And I got invited to speak at a foster youth event when I was living in Hawaii, and that led to me teaching foster youth how to write poetry, how to perform poetry. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved being able to help people build this skill. But I think what was really meaningful to me at the time is to work with adolescents, to work with people who are not very different in age from me, going through different things than me, but also experiencing a lot of suffering, similar to how I suffered as a kid. Um, and I just fell in love with doing that work. So I ended up working with Girls Court Hawaii, along with their probation team, working with adjudicated girls and their families. And I just started to build my interest and skill with running poetry workshops, running art workshops with the girls and their families. And I was realizing I was fumbling a lot. When you teach someone how to tell their story, you have to be prepared for what comes out, and I wasn't.
Oh,
Yeah, you do. I really believe that. I think it's unethical to give someone a tool and then not be able to hold space for what they do with that tool. Um, so I was trying to figure out what to do with it, and I came across a program for expressive arts therapy, and I was like, that's the thing. Um, so I've always been working with adjudicated youth, youth experiencing um, trauma, youth involved with the system at some capacity, whether that's being a foster youth, some sort of court intervention. And yeah, I really fell in love with working with them. And that's continued since I've moved to the Bay Area and working at different facilities here as well.
could you give me an example, perhaps, of you don't have, of course, confidentially, but story of how the spoken word helped a youth who'd committed either a crime or been in the foster care system, and how it might have helped them?
And so many stories. Um, I think of one kid back in Hawaii that I worked with who hadn't written poetry before. Went to a workshop that I did at a foster youth conference or workshop, and didn't share during the workshop. So a lot of kids do share, actually read out their poetry, or interact in the workshop. They didn't say much. Um, and then after the workshop, everybody had left the room and they asked me to stay with them. Um, because they really wanted to read their poem and they wanted someone to hear it. They wanted me to hear it, but they weren't ready for everybody to hear it. And this person had written about a sexual assault that had happened to them when they were younger that they had never told anybody before. And I believe that the prompt that I gave allowed the person to tell that story. It naturally came up. They were able to tell it because of the distance that poetry provides versus like just telling the story straight up. Poetry, we can bury our story in metaphor, in rhyme, and poetic device. So I think that gave her some space. Um, and there was someone who cared to hear her story. So she was able to share it and she cried while she was sharing it, but she felt so relieved that she was finally able to share that story. And she walked up lighter, right? I mean, it was pretty heavy for her to express that story, but she walked out of that room a little bit lighter. And I was so grateful that I was able to hold space for
Uh-huh.
that. And, back then I was only a facilitator. I didn't really know what I was doing. I felt a little heavier uh, with holding her story. So yeah, I know that it really helped her. So for foster youth, a lot of them are experiencing a lot of trauma, just constant chronic trauma, and don't feel safe telling anybody what's going on with them. Or they might not have, adults, attentive adults in their life who are willing to listen to them. So here was an opportunity for her to tell the story and to have an adult who cared to listen. And that person went on to go to college, to have, a pretty empowered life. There were other things that they had access to that helped with that, but, writing and having some sort of expressive outlet really helped.
So you really helped her transform or move along in her experience was helpful and change.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
You say you've worked with adjudicated youth, and I'm curious what kinds of experiences have you had with them? Because this podcast is sort of about spirituality and restorative justice. So could you tie that in a little bit?
Okay. What experiences have I had working with adjudicated youth? I've worked with um, kids on probation, kids who are incarcerated, kids who are um, have some sort of court intervention but haven't, been aren't on probation quite yet or something like that. They might be in a deferment program is one of the ways that I might interact with them. I've interacted with kids who happen to be involved with the court, but I've worked with them through their school system, through their school setting, maybe at an alternative school. Um, yeah, I worked with them in a whole bunch of different places and ways. Um, and you were asking about how is this connected to spirituality? I think everything is connected to spirituality, one. And two, the arts are innately spiritual. We have to tap into our spirit and to something bigger than us, believe in something bigger than us in order to create. Like, to create is a spiritual process across all cultures, across all religions or, spiritual beliefs. It's a part of tapping into a spirit, having a spirit to feel like you can create and that and then the audacity to share that, I think is even more of a spiritual experience to transfer your expression, your internal experience, to transfer that to somebody else is a sharing of your spirit. To receive that is a spiritual practice, to be an active witness. I think a lot of spiritual um, practices, a lot of religions are about the witness to a story, about the witness to testimony. What good is a testimony if you don't have a witness, an active witness to your story? Whether that's a person, God, nature, you need something that holds you witnesses. And arts creates, and what I do in my workshops a lot is creates a lot of containment and ritual in order to provide space for that sharing of spirit. Um, so I think depending on who I'm talking to, we can really adapt the elements, the spiritual elements that are present, because it translates across all cultures.
Like what kinds of rituals? Because ritual certainly is often a vehicle, a method to get there. So what do you offer?
Sure. Ways of um, lots of different things. Done altar work with a lot of folks. Setting this the containment of of a session or a group by, you know, the way that we check in, the way that we close out, the way that we breathe and pace ourselves while we're telling story. Um, my workshops always have a particular, my poetry workshops always have a particular scaffolding that I think is a ritual. You know, we always check in. We always then do some sort of warm in. We all that to build up to the larger rite that we do. There is a ritual, a particular practice that we do around before people can share their poetry. There is a ritual practice of people responding to people's poems after they share. Then we always have some sort of collaborative closeout. All of that is ritual. And then, you know, I've done more kind of stereotypical ritual things of lighting candles or playing music or having particular movement or breathing practices as either a way to, you know, come in and come out of sessions or workshops.
Mhm. When you work with the adjudicated youth, do you notice transformation or repentance or some sense of taking responsibility for their whatever they did to harm someone in the process?
Yeah, yeah, I do. It's it I'm hesitating because it takes time. Every unique individual and where they're at in their journey. Um, Not everybody's ready for accountability. Not everybody's ready for repentance. Um, some folks are not interested at all. There's some, you know, youth I've worked with where in my experience of working with them, never got to that point. And there's, you know, some folks I've worked with where they're ready the moment I meet them. Um, I think it really depends on mm, how supported they feel, um, their capacity for empathy, um, and their capacity for, I think, insight.
Mhm.
Um, and then, yeah, I think for a lot of the kids that I've worked with, the trauma is so severe that they have so many barriers to connecting and trusting people. So you really have to work all over quite a bit of time to build that rapport before that they can, you know, start to consider any of the anything around forgiveness or acceptance.
And do you see, but when you do see it, is there a sense of when you get those few who are really ready, do you see remorse and changing of behavior or making some sort of resolution for their behavior in the future? What I'm tying this to the thoughts of Maimonides, who is a
Sure.
Jewish philosopher who has what he called the core principles of repentance. And there's a stage of leaving it behind and not doing it again, and then there's feeling some regret or remorse. Then there's confessing in some way, and it could be through the spoken word of having hurt someone, and then making some kind of idea of what they might do in the future.
Mm,
Wondering if you'd seen any of that. And if not, that's okay. I'm just curious if it was present with any of your work.
certainly. I've seen some kids who have all of those things. Some who only have one or, you know, a couple. I think, yeah, totally. I think a lot of them are willing to confess to a certain degree about what happened, especially when you give them tools for um, indirect ways of confessing. You know, we can shroud the truth, and I think that's a wonderful first step to starting to take accountability. Maybe we want to get to the point where they say directly what exactly happened and own their role. But we got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So I've worked with a lot of kids who, yeah, they'll confess in a poem. and they'll confess in a metaphor. Um, but maybe it'll take some time before they actually really tell the story. But yeah, I've worked with quite a few kids or quite a few youth, and I guess they're young adults by the time I've met some of them, where they've been incarcerated for a long time for a severe crime. And I find that those folks tend to get to a place of accountability and repentance more than the adolescents who are on shorter stays for minor offenses, because they don't see the impact to their life quite the same. They're still seeing the benefits, less of the negative impacts to their life.
Mhm.
So some of the kids, or yeah, young adults that I've met who are like 18, 20, 22, and they've been incarcerated for 5+ years already. Those are the folks that I saw the most accountability and repentance from, um, and being very direct and blunt about their role in whatever crime or harms to others that they have been a part of. And very much about taking advantage of all the services they can get, so that they can have a future. Those are the folks who are the most eager to have a future away from whatever led to them being incarcerated. Um, and some folks that I've worked with maybe are not as sure about leaving that lifestyle, but are able to maybe feel remorse or be able to at least admit their role in something, wish that it didn't happen, or want to avoid something similar in the future, but have a harder time seeing their life outside of, you know, where they've been living in their community.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's interesting because most of the time I've worked with long-term incarcerated men. And by the time I get to them, they've been in 20, 25 years, and they're at the stage you're describing, which is changing their lives and not wanting to be in prison forever. And even if
right.
in forever, changing who they are as human beings. And those are, I mean, those experiences for me are remarkable to watch because they've stopped being kind of hardcore and they're becoming human. The shell is breaking down, and there's the transformation makes me weep sometimes because it's
Mhm.
deep and profound.
Yeah. I wish that it didn't have anything to do with incarceration or separation from their family and their community in that way, that it wasn't such a severe consequence. I don't I have really complicated views about our criminal justice system. Um, I don't feel that removing people from community leads to healing.
I agree.
And when some of folks need to be removed, from these environments that are abusive, are toxic, are really unhealthy for them, lead to them um, making choices to harm themselves or others as a way to survive in that environment. So leaving that environment, super important. But there's something really important about still being connected to their humanity, to others' humanity, for people seeing the humanity in them, and to not treat them like kind of animals, or to isolate them from relationship. So the youth that I'm speaking of are still connected. They're still connected with other adults. They still have access to services. Some of the juvenile justice places I've worked with make it a real priority to see their spaces as spaces of healing. I worked at a juvenile detention facility in Hawaii on Oahu, and I don't know if he calls them a warden. I can't remember the person who was in charge of that facility. He was also actually the warden of the women's correctional facility. And he was very much about making those spaces healing spaces. Those kids are coming to us because they need care, not because they need, um,
Punishment.
yeah, but they do need consequences. They need boundaries because the environments that they've come from do not have boundaries and natural consequences. There's severe responses to their behavior. So they don't actually learn how to treat themselves with care, how to treat others with care. So they go to those places. And if we, you know, if we treat people with care in those spaces and set them up for success, I think it can be really wonderful what can happen, what transformation can happen when we're removed from an environment that has been really harmful to us. Um, and I, you know, in that example, those kids were removed for a long time. And I think there's something about the shock of that that allowed them to really think about who do they want to be? What do they want for their future? Um, that wasn't happening with the kids who were only there for like, a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months. Yeah.
Well, it's a commentary also. I mean, I too believe that, our criminal justice injustice system is not set up for remediation or healing. I mean, it's more punitive, and we certainly could come up with a whole other way of doing business, but there are ways within them. I wanted to quote this organization, IJSS, is a Hasidic organization, and one of the important thinkers was Rebbe Schneerson. And he said, when he was writing about prisons, is that nobody can reach their highest human potential in a setting like that. They may
Mhm.
be able to change, but they can certainly not reach as far as they can reach under those constrictive circumstances. And I would agree. But we both have seen people make changes and then imagine what they can do once they're out if they're in a healthy, supportive environment. And
Sure, sure. I think that's a big issue too, is that people just get released, without supportive community. Adolescents at a very vulnerable age, if they don't have something set up for them, supportive adults, a supportive place to live, things to do to occupy their time to develop as an adult, to develop as a human, to have a sense of spirituality and connection to their community, they're set up to fail. So many of those kids that I was mentioning were only there for maybe a couple days, a couple weeks, something like that. They keep coming back, right? The recidivism rate is so high because those kids are just going back to the same communities without support. So the kids, I think that, or the adolescents who are there for a little bit longer, tend to work much harder to have something in place when they leave, so that they're successful. Obviously, not everybody is able to have sustained success, but a lot of them do because they work to have something in place when they leave.
And where you work, have they set up those kinds of transition programs where they can get those kinds of supports?
Um, I have seen that at different facilities. Um, the organizations that I work with directly do not provide transitional support or resources. But I have seen places like in Sonoma County and Alameda County, in Honolulu County, um, there be a lot of social workers and mental health professionals really helping kids get set up and connected to different resources, maybe job training, housing support, ongoing counseling, different resources that they can use. Not everybody actually takes them up on those. Uh, it's not always the right fit. Um, some of these youth, man, I've seen some kids go into a program, and you can have whatever feelings you want about the program, but I've seen kids go into like boot camp, those kind of boot camp training
Like a
like
tough
programs.
love kind of thing?
hmm and I got my feelings about those, but you know what? A lot of those kids, they come out with degrees, high school diplomas, they come out with their GED, something. And I've seen kids come out of those kinds of programs transformed. Seriously, you're like, wow, I couldn't believe that you made this kind of change. Taking accountability, having hope for the future, wanting to go to school, doing things, having, a spirit, a sense of hope. 2 weeks, maybe a month later, they go back to the same home with the same parents or the same caregivers, and they go back to how they were before, or sometimes even worse.
Oh.
So a lot of kids, if their family doesn't get support, how can the kid take accountability if their family is not taking accountability for their care? You know? Um, So I think in order to really see accountability, repentance, repair, genuine repair, you need a whole community involved for one person. And our system is not really designed to spend that much time and money on an individual to be better. I will say in these systems, there are so many good people putting a lot of effort and their time, like their free time. They volunteer resources and time to help. Um, and there is an impact, but we're working in a broken system. We're, um, trying to get water out of a sinking boat sometimes.
Right, patching it up and it's broken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I didn't ask you this before, but I wonder if you have any spoken word either from your kids or yourself that you might want to share with us, since that's your genre.
Mm, yeah. Maybe we can
Take a break
pause
here.
pause for a second and I can find one.
Yes, let's
Okay.
do that. So we're back with Jenna Robinson, who has a couple of poems from some of her youth that she's going to read for us. And where did you produce this, Jenna?
Yeah. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of these poems. So I did a program at Sonoma County Juvenile Hall where we did some poetry workshops with some of the youth in there, a couple different units. So there was some folks who were about 12 to 17, and then another unit where they were 17 to 25. And we took the poems from those workshops and with any of the youth who wanted to share their poems with us, we took those poems and we took them out to high schools and middle schools across the Bay Area in Hayward, Richmond, Oakland. And we took them to classes that we work in, and we had those youth write poems back to the incarcerated youth. And then they got those back. And then we did this little reciprocal poetry exchange program that was just so moving. It was so moving. It was, great to take the poems out and have the high school students, the public school students respond back. They got a lot out of it, but the folks in juvenile hall just felt so touched. And we made a book. We made, a poetry book with all their poems. There were more poems from the high school students than there were juvenile hall, so we didn't share all of those. We made sure that it was an even collection. So every page essentially is, a poem from uh, someone in Sonoma County Juvenile Hall, and then one of the response poems. So it got to really be in dialogue with each other. And I wanted to share a couple poems from here, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah. So we're talking about forgiveness, and that was actually one of the topics that we did with the youth in there. So this one's called "I Have Forgiven My Dad," and this is from a juvenile hall participant. I have forgiven my dad for hurting us and loving his drugs and alcohol more than his wife and kids. I have not forgiven my dad for hitting my mom and abusing her when all she wanted was a good life for us. I have forgiven my dad for not being there for me growing up and not caring about me. I have not forgiven my dad for neglecting my sister, trying to kill our family, and beating my queen, because we deserve and will get everything he couldn't give us, because they deserve better, happier, and loving lives.
Very touching.
Yeah. And then I wanted to read the response. Um, this is called Moving On. This is from a high school student in Richmond, California. I relate to you when you say, because they deserve better, happier, and loving lives. Because I've also been in the same situation. And as much as it hurt me seeing my dad do these things to me, it hurt harder seeing my siblings go through it too. It's not enough seeing one person getting abused, depressed, and growing up in a place like that. But it's even worse watching four more kids who relate to you, who feel your same feelings and emotions, witness and go through the same exact thing and not be able to do anything about it. Moving on is accepting how that person is how things just are, and growing stronger from it and learning to be better. As much as I'd like to change someone, I can't. But I can change my future and make a better one than he did for the person I love and for myself. You're strong, and so am I. So let's move together and create anew. Yeah,
Wow.
I know.
Beautiful stuff. This is high schoolers.
High schoolers, high schoolers. And then I have one more, just one more.
Oh, no, no rush. These are great.
This is from that first poem, the first participant shared their poem from. I want to share a poem she wrote in response to receiving these poems. This is called Sunshine. Hearing your voices, reading your words, feels like sunshine on my face and in my heart. Feeling your support, understanding our new bond, feels like you are standing with me. Thinking about him, hearing from you, gives me the strength to move on. Thank you for the strength. Thank you for helping me stay strong. I wish you nothing but the best. I hope you remember if you are in need, you have a friend in me.
Oh,
Yeah.
so touching. These kids are suffering and they're supporting each other.
Yeah, I think that's a part of genuine repair. Um, is that these kids, we hurt people. And there is a level of first really needing to wrestle with how you've been hurt and how that has maybe led to you making certain decisions. So seeing that, I think for the juvenile justice hall kids, hearing that other kids on the outside had been through the same thing was really normalizing of their experience. They felt less alone. I think they felt really cared for and understood, by poems that allowed them to go deeper, to acknowledge more about themselves. I think when we feel like we are not monsters, that we are having normal experiences to extraordinary situations, where we can see that there is a reason behind what we're doing and that we were hurt. I think that provides a lot more space for folks to take accountability for the harm that they cause to others. But that's such a, kind of back to what we were saying before, it's such a slow process. That took weeks to do.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the way our system is set up right now, really isn't designed for that kind of time and effort. But people can transform. We gotta really make a lot of space and come with a lot of empathy instead of just harshness and yeah,
Judgment.
the judgment. That's right, totally.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Jenna, this is very touching. I mean, hearing the poems really brought to life who these kids are and how this kind of process can help them in a long road.
Hmm.
Road. I mean, that's not going to do it, but it's something for them. Um, is there anything else you might like to tell us about your work or the kids that you've worked with, or anything you might like to add?
Oh, what a big question,
I know,
Elaine.
not fair.
It's such a big
Come
question.
back with an addendum another time.
Sure. I it's so hard to say something just kind of final like that about such a complicated group of people. Um, I think that I just want to emphasize the need to really see them, to come with a non-judgmental stance. I mean, yeah, we're talking about taking accountability, sharing your story, but you can't share your story with someone you don't trust. And building trust when you have come from a lot of trauma and harm takes a really long time. Um, so I would, really encourage folks to put in the effort to see these kids as kids, regardless of what they've done, they're kids. There are people who have been harmed, um, and have led them to make certain decisions, that have maybe hurt themselves or other people. I think if we can start to see them as kids who are hurting and really work to build a relationship with them, to see that in them. Over time, though, we can build trust with them so that they can start to tell their story, and eventually that'll lead to them taking accountability. I think that's a natural consequence of genuinely building a relationship with somebody. But it's really easy to build that relationship with someone who has experienced harm. So easy to empathize with the survivor, really hard to empathize with the person who's caused harm. We can't really interrupt violence. We can't interrupt and, provide care for survivors if we don't see the survivor inside the person causing harm, you know?
I love that. That's a wonderful way to end, Jenna.
Right
And
on.
I'm curious, if people wanted to reach you, how would you mind them reaching out as a result of hearing your podcast?
Oh, sure. I would love for
How,
people to
how
reach
could
out.
how could they find you?
Yeah. Lots of different places, but the um uh if you're really interested in this idea of poetry in particular, um, go to bayareacreative.org. I'm on there. You can contact us through that way. If you're just interested in learning more about the organization, or if you'd like to reach me directly, I'd go there. I would also, you can check out uh, CIIS, our expressive arts therapy program. I'm on our website. You can see me there. And that's where we teach about these kinds of, holistic, intersectional, liberatory focused models using the expressive arts and somatic principles.
Brilliant. It's
Yeah.
just a joy to have spoken with you. I appreciate it, Jenna. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Jenna Robinson.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for inviting me. This is wonderful.